Hi there, I'm Ian Tomson-Smith, MD of Policing TV, and I'm pleased this afternoon to be joined by Cath Pickles from Restitute. Cath, welcome. Really keen to find out more about Restitute and all the great work you've been doing. So as a starter, would you like to just give a brief introduction of yourself, perhaps the journey that you've been through to sort of set up Restitute, and where Restitute is today?
Fantastic. Yes, certainly. It's good to meet you as well, Ian. So Restitute was born in this room in 2019. It was an idea I had that had been brewing for quite some time. To go back a little bit further, between the ages of about 8 and 11, my daughter was sexually abused. We didn't find out until a good couple of years later. And eventually she was able to disclose who it was. The case was NFA'd, which I understand that most people know means no further action. And then we spent many, many years literally trying to just keep her alive. The damage of the abuse was quite profound, but the knock-on effect of her as well in terms of bullying at school was actually even more difficult to tackle. But eventually she started to make some kind of recovery. Things were slightly safer at home, more stable. And as she started to make some kind of recovery, we looked round at ourselves as a family and realised that the rest of us had completely fallen apart, not really with anybody having that level of awareness. What I should probably explain is that when a child discloses sexual abuse, the police get involved, and very often social services do. Social services will come in to the family home, and they will do an assessment. And what they're assessing for is risk, which is their primary aim is to make sure, is this child still at risk? And of course, she was living in a home where the abuse hadn't happened. We were fortunate it wasn't a family member. We were a stable, normal, average, good enough family. So the police and social services, the police realised that they weren't going to have enough evidence, and social services realised that we were a good enough family and that my daughter was safe in terms of there was no chance of her being abused again in the house. And at that point, they both withdrew. We then disappeared from the system and had very little support in terms of trying to manage any of the issues that we were dealing with. We didn't really know how to deal with disclosures. We had 3 years where we knew she'd been abused, but we didn't know by who. We didn't know how to manage that. We didn't know how to manage things to do with school, with mental health, with housing. All these different challenges, physical health issues started to come up. So we were literally running around. It felt like we were the centre of the spoke, trying to coordinate everything for the care of my daughter. And that was absolutely, completely exhausting. Now, my background means that I used to work in local government. So I had a really quite good idea about the system. But even for me, it was completely flummoxing to try and work out where I was going or what I was doing. And we worked out at one point there was 96 different organisations or people that I had to have the conversation with that started, there's something you need to know. 96. And that is putting all the teachers of her class, of all of her different classes, in one box. 96. So it was no wonder that we were pretty knackered. My husband was working full time. We're not a well-off family. We're not a family, really average, average salary, average life, average house. My husband was still working full time. So I had to give up work, which meant that my income completely crashed. So my husband was still working. I had to give up work to provide care for my daughter. That meant that our income just absolutely fell on the floor. So we were really struggling financially. We had a son who was in the process of trying to do his GCSEs and then his A-levels. And from about the age of 14, he was bringing himself up. And he became a young carer. We didn't know that at the time because nobody actually recognised that victims of crime had caring responsibilities. It was absolutely felt like everywhere we turned, it was no, 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 you don't fit this criteria, you don't meet this criteria, you're not entitled to this, you're not entitled to that, we don't understand that, we can't meet your needs. I got offered a few Indian head massages, which I really didn't want, but, it just felt like I cannot believe that there is nothing out there to guide families and carers through this process, but there wasn't. So in 2019, as Sarah started to get better and, to become more predictable and more mature, I thought, right, I'm going to do something about this. And fortunately for me, Sarah had already waived her right to anonymity by this point, and she'd been doing some mental health work with the local newspaper. And so her story was already out there, which for me was I was incredibly lucky. Because for so many parents, they are completely silenced from expressing their own needs and their own experiences, because until your child is 18, they cannot waive their right to anonymity. Quite right. But it also means that parents like me, who are dealing with the most horrendous situations, find it very difficult to articulate their needs, because if they can't explain why they need help, then it's very, very difficult for them to be able to explain what they need. And it's not our story to tell. And most parents are very, very, very clear that this didn't happen to us, it happened to someone we care for. And so we're silenced. And we're also silenced by the fact that there is such huge shame and blame from neighbourhoods, from schools, from police, from social services, GPs, people I work with, people we've supported, have told us that GPs have said things like, surely you must have known. It's like, well, if I'd known, I would have done something about it. And other things you see in the newspapers, the media, there is this narrative, I blame the parents. Where were the parents?
Well, but it's not, sorry, Cath, just jumping in there, but it's not just, as I understand it, parents. As you say, you support third-party victims of crime across multiple different, 4 key different areas.
Absolutely.
This is just one of the parts of what you do.
Absolutely. But I have to say that supporting parents and carers of children who have survived sexual abuse or sexual violence, and adults who have historically, who are caring for people, and this could be recent or in the past, that is inevitably the vast majority of our work. That is the unmet need in terms of scale. We also support people who have survived domestic abuse, or rather who are caring for people who have survived domestic abuse. So that could be a new partner who is caring for someone who's got significant mental or physical health needs in this new relationship. Adults who have survived sexual violence, either as a child or an adult, and are going through that system. So their partners very often are left with huge amounts of challenges and difficulties that they don't know how to articulate, and they've literally lost the person that they would have talked to about it, because the person they would have talked to about it is the primary victim. So there's so much that happens in this world, but the reality is, Ian, is that the vast majority of our work is with people caring for survivors of sexual abuse or sexual violence.
And I'm interested in how this works, because I believe academia, University of Suffolk, have coined the term the Restitute model.
Yeah.
And how you deal with, say, third-party victims of crime.
Yeah.
And how, I think we touched on this before we started recording, how people will find out about you.
Yeah.
How people engage with you, and more specifically, how the organisations that should know about you can engage and support the people that need it.
Yeah. So the Restitute model, when we started creating Restitute, when I said we started in February 2019, the first year was spent on research and development, was spent on a great deal of time really, really thinking, first of all with me and then with other third-party victims of crime, about what we needed and when, how it could be delivered, how it should be delivered, what was important, and how we start cutting through those really destructive feelings of shame and blame that people feel. Because it starts with the primary victim. If you were going to choose someone to provide care and support for a primary victim, you'd want that person to be as physically fit, mentally fit, organised, empowered, financially stable as you possibly could. That would be your ideal person to care for that person. Yeah? Someone who can be a strong advocate and a stable influence. And most of the people before these kinds of things happen, that's exactly who they are. But the system, the shame, the blame, the isolation, the criticism, the re-traumatization through the system destroys all of that. So not only are they dealing with the impact of finding out that something horrendous has happened to their loved one, they're also having to deal with the trauma of the entire process that comes with outside interference, outside involvement into family life. And it's incredibly destructive. So we started from the basis that there were three things that were absolutely essential. And there's a lot of thought around the Restitute model that actually says why, and we'd need 8 hours for me to explain it to you. So I'm going to keep it really simple. So the first thing is that we need to build up trust. These are people who have fundamentally been betrayed. They've been betrayed by someone that they trusted in their home life or in their family life, or somebody who should have been protecting their loved one wasn't, whatever it is. Yeah, they've been betrayed. So trust is massive. So a one-to-one support worker who can be with someone for up to a year. Again, the year thing is really important because it's a length of time that someone can imagine is worth building up a relationship with someone. It's worth trusting that person. It's worth establishing that relationship. As someone who was offered 6 weeks therapy, yeah, you're sitting there thinking, God, I'm not even going to touch the surface in 6 weeks, and I'm certainly not going to trust you with some of the really, really challenging stuff after 6 weeks. And I don't even know where to begin, so let's not even start. So a year is really important. A one-to-one support worker, ideally, who has got lived experience of caring for someone in traumatic circumstances, so who gets it. And a huge number of my support workers now have that lived experience, which is really, really important for the credibility of them, but also for my organisation. People know that they can trust us. They know it's going to last a reasonable length of time. The next thing is what that support worker does. And that support worker, yes, offers emotional support, but we're not therapists and we're not counsellors. We are the roll up your sleeves, let's crack on, let's work out what needs to happen, what needs to be done that will support you to become that good enough parent again. And that is completely flies in the face of what a great many other services offer, or what people think people need, which is, oh, send them for therapy, send them for therapy, send them for therapy. There's no point in sending somebody for therapy if they are basically fighting to keep somebody else alive, if they are wondering when the next money is going to come in, if they're going to be able to stay in their house, and what is going to happen next with their loved one. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is really clear. Food, water, safety, shelter. Let's get that bit sorted out first. When we've done that bit, let's move on to the next bit. And for some of our families, they are suddenly, catastrophically, and incredibly quickly pushed to be worrying about those kinds of things. If you're in a two-parent family or in a two-adult family, and suddenly one of you can't work, either because they're the primary victim or they're the perpetrator and have been removed from the house, then suddenly you're trying to pay a mortgage that you previously thought you'd be fine paying that you can't pay now. So let's get that stuff sorted out first. Let's actually help someone deal with this massive list of things that have suddenly arrived on their doorstep, at the same time as providing that emotional support that they need to be able to get through the day. Someone they can trust, someone who's confidential, somebody who has absolutely really nothing to do with the primary victim. So they can say the unsayable. They can ask the unaskable. there are questions that people need to ask that actually don't necessarily mean that they believe what they're asking the question of, but they just want clarification. Did this really happen? Is a really good example. There's something. So people need to be able to ask really, really difficult questions that they wouldn't ever ask a policeman or a social worker or someone working with their child, because they're always really worried about how that's going to be interpreted by those people in authority. So if I ask somebody, did this really happen? Are they going to write down, oh, mum doesn't believe the child, or mum doesn't, or partner doesn't believe the wife or the husband? It's not that. It's about understanding how this could be true. And once you've got that, it helps you settle into a much safer place. Because if I give you two choices, my loved one is lying, made this up, mistaken, didn't understand, yeah? Or my loved one has suffered an absolutely horrific crime, where would your brain rather it goes? It would much rather you go to my loved one misunderstood, my loved one's lying for whatever reason, my loved one's saying something to avoid doing something. That is where your brain goes, because it's safer. So until you can actually ask that question, you've always got that doubt in your mind. And if you've got that doubt in your mind, that can make life very, very difficult. So that kind of thing can really help. And that's why we are completely independent of anything that we offer the primary victim, to give that carer the opportunity to ask those really, really difficult questions, but also to know that nothing that they say to us is going to get back to their loved one. And apart from safeguarding considerations, which are really, really important to us, that what they say to us is confidential, so they can ask those safe questions. So that's the first thing. Second thing, practical support. Do you remember I mentioned about Indian head massages?
Yeah.
I did not want an Indian head massage. I did not want a craft activity. I did not want to go and have a nice cup of tea with somebody. What I wanted was a skip to get rid of my stuff that had built up over years and years and years and years of caring, that I just simply didn't have the energy or the organisation to be able to systematically take it to the dump and sort it all out and do those kinds of things. It's also incredibly difficult to leave the house sometimes when you've got caring responsibilities and the dump is 20 minutes away. So that's a whole hour. I wanted to skip, and everyone just looked at me like I was mad. So actually, what can we offer to this family to make life easier, better, simpler, and more constructive? And of course, that attitude then is a two-pronged thing, because it's saying you're valued, you're important, your needs are important. And sometimes we send people a bunch of flowers when they've had a really, really rough day. And the feedback we get from that is people saying to us, you've got no idea how special that made me feel, and how it's helping me to start realising that I am part of the solution, not to blame. Nobody sends people a bunch of flowers if they think that you're a terrible person and you're guilty of something awful, that all these thoughts go through your mind. So that's the second thing. And then for those who want it, those who need it, and those who are ready for it, which are three different things, we will offer therapeutic support. And it won't be counselling or talking therapy. It is specialist psychological or therapeutic support that matches the need of the person. So it could be EMDR. Some people go through court and they cannot unsee or unhear their child's tapes. They cannot cope with the questions that they were asked, and these things build up. So it's specialist. It could be art therapy. It could be EMDR. It could be counselling. It could be trauma stabilization. It could be any of those, and it's assessed. But it's way down the line, because, like I said at the beginning, we have to get these families back to a position where they're actually not really, really struggling, either through poverty or housing or chaos or court systems or whatever it is that's causing the biggest problems right in front of them.
Cath, that's been brilliant. That has been a really insightful deep dive into the services you've given us.
I haven't told you how to do us. You need me to do that, don't you?
Yes. There is so much more that we are going to get into in part 2 of our chat. So, but for now, thank you ever so much. That has been brilliant, and I've learned so much. But Cath Pickles, CEO and founder of Restitute, thank you very much.
Thank you.